Hello, in this video I will explain how to edit data from a table. This part would be the part of editing data from a table in Laravel with Ajax. From a Laravel CRUD and Ajax example. First, what I'm going to do is go to roots, web, PHP, and create a root with put, with products, the, edit, and the ID, as URL. And use the products controller class, and the edit, which would be for the public function edit that is in the products controller, PHP. Then I go to products controller, PHP, and create the public function edit with the request and the ID. And then I create the product to search the ID. Then I create the validator, which is equal to validator with the make and the request to validate the form. Then I create the example name, example description, example code. Then I create the error message with the required. Then I create an if with the validator, which would be so that in case it fails, an error appears in response. So I create a return with response, and the JSON with the status, which is equal to 422. And the error subdate, which is equal to validator, and the messages, and I close. Then I create an else, and in it I create the product, and what would be for the table. Example, name, would be equal to the request. Example, code, would be equal to the request. Example, description, would be equal to the request. And I close. Then I create the product, and the save. And I close. Then I create a return, and the product, and I close. Then when we have the table, and also the on-click of the update button, which in this case would be on-click, edit, product, and the ID, in that table. Then I create the modal for the data update. The modal div has the ID of update formulary, modal. And in the modal body, the form would be found. So it would be example, name, example, description, and example, code. And then I create a button with type submit and the ID, save, update, formulary, btn. And I close the modal. Then I create in the JS section, the update, product, JS. And I close. In the update, product, JS, I create the function edit product and ID, which would be to show the modal with the ID data. Then I create a let URL and the ID, which in this case is products and the ID. I also create the Ajax. The root would be used to get data, and the get type. Then I create the success to show the values in those ID. First I create a let product to show the product response. Then I create the alert, div, and the empty HTML, as well as the update, div error. And then I create the update, ID with the valend product, ID, which would show its ID, the same with the product, example, name, example, description, example, code. Then I create the update formulary, modal, with a show that would be to show the modal. And then I create the error in case there is an error, show the error. Then I create the save, update formulary, btn, which would use the update product function when clicking, which would then be developed. Then I create the update product function. the save, update, formulary, btn, would be the one that changes the property from disabled to true. Then I create a let URL, which would be for the URL. In this case the ID of the update ID would be used. Then I create a let data, which would be for the table data. And I create the for of the table, and then its ID of the HTML, and then the val. And I close. Then I create the Ajax, and develop it so that it works. First I create the headers, then the URL, the type which in this case is put, and the data, it would be data. Then when the response is successful, the save, update, formulary, btn, I would convert the disable property to false. Then I create a let so that an alert appears. And I create an alert div, HTML, with that alert which in this case would be success, HTML. Then I create the 3 of the table with a val, without completing. I would also use the show all products, which would be the function to show the data. And, finally I would hide the modal with hide. And close. Then I create the error, so that it shows the errors. In this case the save, update, formulary, btn, I would convert the disable property to false. Then I create the validation errors, which would be those that would be in the validation error messages. In this case it would be errors. In case to show error, the errors update response appears. I create a let errors update with the response and the errors update. Then I create a let for the table update errors. In this case I create a let with example, description, validation, and I close. And then I create an if, so that when the values are not completed, an error appears. In this case it would be example description validation, and I equal it to a li, with errors, update, and the example, update, description, and the 0. And I close the li. In this case the error would be shown in case of not completing. Then the same would be done with the example name validation and the example code validation. Then I create a let error HTML with the alert, with the error message, and that shows the 3 error messages. And I close it. The div with ID error update div would be what shows the errors. Then I close, and close would be the function. That would be all.